The element of consciousness is the intelligent awareness within us that gives us life every day. Let's term this objective consciousness or the subconsciousness. This is a system of awareness separate from the conscious mind. It is subconscious, but it is incredibly intelligent and mindful. It is also separate from the thinking brain, but it operates via the other parts of the brain to keep our body in order. With objective consciousness running the show, the brain processes millions of automatic functions every second on a cellular level and at an aggregate level as well, of which we are not consciously aware. These are the aspects of our health and life that we take for granted every day, the systems that control our heart, digest our food, filter our blood, regenerate cells, and even organize our DNA. It takes a great and unlimited consciousness to be responsible for all these functions. This objective intelligence knows so much more than what our personality self knows, even though we think we know it all. This is a universal, fundamental aspect of every human being, independent of age, gender, education, religion, social status, or culture. Few ever stop to acknowledge its power, will, and intelligence. In fact, this aspect of consciousness is what gives life to all things. It is a real intelligence with quantifiable energy or force that is innate to all things. It is objective and constant. It has been called zero-point field, the source, and universal intelligence. It is the source that collapses the quantum field into all physical form. Literally, it is the life force. Quantum physics is just beginning to measure this field of potentials. As human beings, we possess both elements of consciousness. We are consciously aware as a subjective consciousness, and we exist because we are connected to the force of life that is an objective consciousness. We have free will to choose the quality of life we desire, and at the same time, a greater intelligence is giving and allowing us the animation of life in every second. In fact, science now understands that everything physical, including you and me, is just the tip of an immense iceberg. The question is, what is the field that holds it all together, and how do we make contact with it? The brain has the equipment, so to speak, to facilitate both these levels of consciousness. The brain without consciousness is inert and lifeless. When consciousness is facilitated through the human brain, the end result is called mind. Mind is a working brain, a brain in action. Mind comes into being when an operating brain is animated with life. There is no mind without the physical expression of life through a functioning brain. Mind, then, is the product of consciousness manipulating the subtle and diverse neural tissues of the brain. Since both of these specific levels of consciousness animate the brain to create mind, we must possess two different arrangements at work in the brain. We have conscious mind and subconscious mind embroidered in two diverse brain systems. Accordingly, the brain has two distinct generalized systems with appropriate hardware to facilitate two types of consciousness. Our conscious awareness is based in the neocortex. The crown of our brain, the neocortex, is the seat of free will. This is the conscious thought center of the brain, where everything an individual learns and experiences is recorded, and where information is processed. The arrangement of how brain cells are connected together in the neocortex distinguishes you from other individuals and makes you unique. You have the ability to be consciously aware of yourself, your actions, your thoughts, your behavior, your feelings, your environment, and your mind, and to express thoughts and ideas. The invisible qualities of self-reflection, self-contemplation, and self-observation define your subjective experience of self. When we speak in terms of a person losing consciousness or regaining consciousness, we mean that he or she is leaving or returning to a level of being, self-aware, awake, and possessing a conceptual memory of self. All this is managed by the neocortex, the new brain.
So the idea is, if you can change the way you think and change the way you feel, could you begin to produce outcomes or effects in your life that cause you to believe that you're the creator of your life instead of the victim of your life, which means then you would have to think greater than that circumstance, and you would have to feel differently in the presence of that circumstance. And if you truly could, and begin to create an outcome, the synchronicity, the serendipity, the coincidence that happens in your life, you're going to pay attention to what you did, and you're going to realize that on some level you had a hand in that, that you were a participant in that. Our interest is to teach people how to reverse that process. Every person, every circumstance, every condition, every place, every object that you own is mapped neurologically in your brain. So your brain is a record of the past. It's an artifact, a repository of everything you've learned intellectually or experienced. End products of experience are called emotions. The memories that we have in our life produces familiar emotions, or our response to anybody that we know in our life. There's a neurological network for your boss, for your coworker, for your ex. And for most people, their interaction in the environment is causing their environment to control their thinking, or their personal reality is controlling their personality. So our interest is to see, if your personality is made of how you think, how you act, and how you feel, is it possible if I begin to change the way I think, change the way I act, and change the way I feel, should my life change? Because I'm changing. And so the interest for us then is to be able to meet the challenges and conditions in our life from a greater level of consciousness, and not be victimized by those circumstances, but to take time and to review how you're going to think, how you're going to act, and how you're going to feel. That's meditation. And review how you're not going to think, how you're not going to act, and how you're not going to feel. It just turns out that tends to be 95% of who we are, is those unconscious programs. So it's so much easier to forget than to remember, because it's the majority of who we are, after a certain point in our life. So changing that process, the overcoming process of that same self, somehow begins to produce effects in people's lives. And that's kind of the exciting part about being a creator of your life.
Let's talk a bit more about the conscious and subconscious aspects of mind. Conscious mind affords us the ability to process conscious thoughts and information. This mind is self-knowledgeable, self-conceptual, self-realizing, and self-perceiving. It is what we refer to as the self, the you. Using its free will, the conscious part of us can place its attention on any one thing. This is the privilege of being human. In the chiropractic science and philosophy, it is called the educated mind, and it is processed in our newest brain region, the neocortex. The brain is the organ with the greatest number of neurons organized together. Where there is the greatest number of neurons, there are the greatest levels of intelligence. Consciousness uses the brain to mindfully process learning and experiences into electrochemical impulses called thoughts. The mind, then, is the product of the brain in action. The mind operates when the brain is alive and facilitating consciousness. Consciousness has two specific qualities. Objective consciousness is the life force, the source, and the zero-point field. You and I are connected to that field, which affords us life through the midbrain, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. This is the subconscious mind. Subjective consciousness, situated in the neocortex, is the explorer, the identity that learns and evolves its understandings for a greater expression of life. This is the conscious mind. Once we understand how the brain works to create mind, we can go beyond the comfortable boundaries of what we already know. When we can unite our conscious mind to that infinite mind with unlimited potential, we will have access to a world of new possibilities. Consciousness is the only element that makes sense of how we can change the brain and mind. It is that intangible aspect of ourself that influences the brain to produce mind. The time that we are truly conscious, attentive, aware, and present is when we change how the brain works to create a new level of mind. When we can use the conscious mind together with the subconscious mind, we will be able to modify our hardware and upgrade our operating systems. At that moment of merging consciousness, the brain can be rewired.
If you're living in stress and you're living in survival and that system is switched on, then everything will be a threat. Everything will be a danger. Everything will be a reason to rush, to be impatient, to be frustrated, to be judgmental, because that's the consciousness. That's the emotion we're living by. So now you have a problem with a coworker, you have a problem with your partner, whatever it is that you use as an example, and you have to give a presentation. Now you really have one of two choices. Either be victimized by those conditions in your life and you stay in that emotional state. And I'll say to you, Jay, why are you that way? Well, I'm this way because of this person, this circumstance. The person or circumstance is controlling the way I feel and the way I think. Anything that controls the way I feel and the way I think, I'm victim to, right? Okay. Or I actually can be a creator now. Okay. So when it's the hardest, it matters the most. Okay. So there's going to be a story, a valid story that's going to go along with those emotions that you're going to have to give up, that you can address at another time from a different state. If you're altered in that state and you say something, you do something, you write the email, you send the text, you'll always regret it. You'll always say, I should have never said that. I should have never done that. We got to learn that we're in an altered state at that time. So there's only one of two choices. You either stay there the whole day and tell everybody that story, or you say, okay, let me take a moment. Remember that this is the experiment called life. Okay, let me practice getting relaxed in my heart. Let me slow the animal down. Let me practice. I'll take a few minutes. Now, let me breathe. Let me get my state back. Let me change everything. Okay, let me remember who I am, who I want to be when I open my eyes, and let me practice that again. Now, even if you had to do that 10 times in one day, I would say it was a day worth living. I would say it was